Conversations with the operators, founders, and leaders doing the slow, hard, beautiful work of becoming who you always knew you could be. I'm George Leith. Let's get to work. Jamie Cohen, my guest on the Evolve Pros podcast. Jamie, thanks for dialing in. You're in St. Louis, obviously.
I am in St. Louis, and George, I'm always happy to make time to chat with you.
Well, it's great to have you on the new show. Jamie was a guest of mine a couple of times on the Conquer Local podcast, and we've known each other for a number of years. And you're involved in an evolution right now in an organization that is evolving. But you have your last few roles have been involved in evolutions of organizations that were going through change. So that's why I'm excited to have you on the show. You've got a very unique perspective on evolution and moving organizations. And we've had late evenings discussing and role playing about what maybe we'd do differently in orchestrating some of these evolutions. But talking about the current evolution that you're involved in, you've been at Salem Media now for a number of years, and it's really been remarkable the way that organization has been changing. Let's rewind to day one when you walked in the door at Salem to where you are today. What does that look like? If you could just give us a bit of a high level, if you were to look back over those years.
It's been a fun roller coaster ride to be on, because if I just say a roller coaster ride, then that doesn't imply that I'm having fun. Evolution is a constant state. Because you're never truly where I don't know that you're ever truly where you need to be, or I'm never comfortable where I am, always striving for more or something different. Salem has given me every piece of that and continues to. 8 years into our digital transformation and digital evolution, and finding more to do every day. I would not have, there are definitely things that if I went back and listened to our pod from, I think, a Burrell show long ago to today, probably not everything I said back then has come to fruition or maybe even relevant today. But the process of transformation continues. And it's about, path, process, and, at the end, hopefully profitability.
I remember when you were in the running for that role, and we had met when you were in a previous organization, and then I got the phone call the one day. We're like, okay, this is what I'm doing now, and we need to have a conversation. And then we did that first interview when you were on the show, and we were in California, and you graciously invited me to come speak in front of your leadership group, and I remember that interview quite clearly because I listened back to it. But I also remember how the look that was on your face. And it was a look of maybe fear coupled with excitement and enthusiasm. So if we could go back to that moment and that when you were just starting in the role and you'd kind of got enough under the hood to go, holy shit, this is what I'm into. What is that? What did that feel like in those early days as you were digging in? Because you were pretty clear that you knew where it needed to go, but we all know that the best laid plans, right, doesn't quite work out the way that we had it in our heads.
There's always what the journey, people believe the journey looks like, and the actual path of the journey. Anybody who spends time on LinkedIn or socials is going to see there's all sorts of images and memes that that take that same whether it's the iceberg and the real, where the real work happens and nobody sees it, and that's the reality. The passion and energy is there. The fear still remains in because of what I'm doing, I feel is so important. It's there's a sense of importance to the work that Salem does that makes it something different than the work that I did when I worked at other places. There's a different expectation of what the outcomes do, and the things that we do for, media, for, there's a higher there's a higher meaning to the work that we're doing. So it keeps you going, it keeps you motivated, it keeps you passionate. But there's always the fear of what you don't know, and I think that's always a part of everything. But it's how you conquer that fear. How you overcome what is your weakness to make it a strength. You run from it or you run to it. Every day I run to it, realizing it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fun every day. Not everybody's going to like you. Most people may not like you. But you have to kind of keep moving forward, understanding what your role is and what you're here to do. I try to not lose sight of that, and that's what keeps me 8 years in, passionate about what we're doing, and excited for all the things that we're doing today as a company and continuing that evolution journey that started, George, as you corrected me, in California at our managers meeting, where you graciously accepted the offer to speak to our leadership group.
You ever want me to go back to Fairmount and West Hills at any time? It was a beautiful facility. So let's just go back just a moment ago because you still, I will tell you, you still have that energy. We got to have dinner together in Vegas at the NAB here recently, and you still have that energy and you're ready to conquer the next challenge. But I what I'm hoping to get from leaders like you on this show is it it's not always a bed of roses. There has to be questioning, are we doing the right thing? Is this the right approach? Did what I what the play I ran 6 months ago, is it still the play that I should be running today? Like that anxiety is a real thing that you're constantly dealing with.
Moving anybody's cheese is not fun. And when you're, but that's part of what, again, I didn't come into any role or into my career saying this is what I'm wanting to do. It's where life dropped me, dropped me as a, uh, digital person in 2001, telling this same story that I'm still regurgitating today. It's that evolution and journey that's happening in media, and it is not all a bed of roses. You do spend a lot of time questioning what you're doing, because anytime there's people that you work with that don't see everything the way you see it, if you're not thinking to yourself, am I wrong? Then you're not then it makes it a lot harder. So I think you have to question yourself, because if you don't, you're likely to miss something. So yeah, it's the people you work with are important. The trust that you have, the you know mission, purpose. Why are we doing this? Why would it? Why stick on a hard path when you know it's a hard path? George, I've not found the easy path still. I don't, it doesn't exist. Every path is hard. Everything is hard. This is what I truly feel my job and my life is about: moving things forward and helping people unlock their greatest potential. Understanding that's my job and what we're doing, you know, um,
So is that, to back to what you just mentioned about moving people's cheese? Is that your cheese? Is the ability to take somebody and show them that there is a better, more efficient way that they can conduct themselves, and the benefit is there for them?
it's funny. My boss Dave talks about his love language is serving people. And that's what makes him happy. That's, of all the things he does, that's what makes him feel the best every day, is when that's what he's doing with our employees and people that he cares about. For me, it's a good question, George, but I do think there is something there. For me, it is getting somebody to realize and you know see the benefits of the things that we're trying to do and say, okay, I see it, I can take it and run from here. You know, um, that's what it's about. Hey, I've got it, I see it, I get it. Thank you. Let's go forward together.
Yeah, I had a phone call here recently. I will not bring up the name of the individual to protect their identity. But it was an interesting call because they were like, when you were making the adjustments that you were making in your role, I don't know if I necessarily agreed with them. But now I understand why. And now I see why you were taking the approach that you were taking. Um, I don't necessarily still know if everything was the right way to do it. In fact, I'm sure there were pieces that weren't correct in it, but to have a little bit of that validation come later on, um, is like, okay, we did impact a few folks. And it does kind of get people to understand, because if you don't change, and we've been involved in organizations and businesses that just refuse to change, and then you have to really go find something else to do, because then it just ends. And so one thing that you and I've talked a lot about is this generational workforce that we have, where we're in this really unique place where we've got 4 generations in the building, in most organizations, and they all want different things, and they all care about different things, and they all can't really be led with the same approach. And that's, you've been bringing in new individuals that are new to the company, but also, they're podcast experts and they're distribution of podcast data experts, and you're doing it inside a traditional radio company where podcasting and radio for a while there. But so as you bring these new people in, what is that doing to the transformation of the organization as you continue to bring in? And I'm not just saying this younger new talent, you're bringing in veterans as well that have just done things differently, but they're all sitting in those 4 generations. How's that impacting the evolution that Salem Media has been on?
Interesting question. I think it's, I think there's opportunity in every, in every group that we work with. I mean, I
So
think
it's basically, we got the boomers, you and me, Gen Gen Z, and millennials. We got the 4 different workforces.
yep,
And we were sitting at the table the other day where you've got your henchman, and then you've got that young woman, Ashley, who's come in, and they
yep,
all care about different shit, and they all bring different capabilities and
yeah.
expectations to the organization.
That's what it really gets back to, is having a clear mission. If you have clarity on what your purpose is as a company, then it's not a question of, hey, I think our purpose is this, so I'm doing this. It's, our purpose is this. Therefore, what we do is designed to support that purpose and the goals and align to that organizational purpose. So, as things change, what doesn't change is purpose. And if purpose, if your purpose, doesn't change, then as people come in and change, they understand what your culture is. And I think that's one of the things that, as a company does go through, this process and period of change, it's, it is hard not to lose your culture. People feel like, wow, all of these things are changing, and all of these things are different, and that makes people uncomfortable. I get uncomfortable when 2 girls, 2 kids, when things are moved around the house, I get uncomfortable. So it's an understanding of, hey, the reason we're doing these things is because it aligns to what our purpose is. We have shared goals, that align to what our purpose is. So if you can keep that type of structure, it's less about what I think, what John thinks, what Sally thinks, what Tim thinks, what Tina thinks. It's more about, this is what our purpose is. Our job is to support that purpose, not take us away.
When you said yes, that you were going to take this job, and you became the chief digital officer at Salem Media, what did you think was going to be the hardest part, and then what actually turned out to be one of the hardest parts? Because a lot of times what we think is going to be the challenge isn't necessarily what turns out to be one of the biggest challenges.
The biggest thing I thought was going to be the challenge was the gap of learning a new medium. I grew up as a print person, a digital person in a print world.
Mm-hmm.
So I never sold print, or I never sold radio, but I came in on the digital side of each of those assets. It's always been about the evolving to the digital side.
So did that was that validated that really was the hardest part?
I would say, in retrospect, no. It's not the hardest part because that's just what I was the most uncomfortable. That was the biggest gap that I knew I personally had. My biggest personal gap was going to be asking irrelevant questions about things that other people is their life and is how they've made their income, and something that most people in radio have a passion story to radio. So the hardest thing has been finding shared visions of you know creating shared realities of where we actually are that we can align to, and then documenting in alignment where we want to be. You know, those two things are foundational in change. And if your team isn't lockstep in where we are, then they're not going to accept your or the framing on where you want to be, because in their mind, they go where they want to be. Again, that's where it brings back to purpose. It's not your purpose as the chief digital officer. It's how do you serve as the chief digital officer to meet the organizational purpose. It's not the other way around.
And at Salem, you guys have the other pressure, I would call it, because you've got missions that you are tasked with, and you kind of talked about that off the top. I've always admired how the organization has been able to stay focused on that, because there's enough challenges in the world without having that one additional nuance that Salem has of fulfilling a mission and a purpose. But they've stayed very true to that, and you've had a hell of a couple of years over there with changes and shows and hosts, and like it's been a very tumultuous time, that's for sure. But all that said, there has been an enormous amount of success as well. And as one of the industries out there that is facing this change, Salem has made a change to not, you sold off some property and got out of debt. And you guys have grown digital to be a digital first organization, and digital continues to be one of the top growing areas. And I admire what you've been able to do there. But I also, having the friendship that you and I I realize that it's not been easy. And I think that that's part of the thing that I want to bring out on this show. There's so many shows out there that it's all sunshines and rainbow, and then you find out that no, that's not really the way that it works. And I think that it's important for people to understand that evolution sometimes comes with you stubbing your toe as well.
If you don't, you're doing it wrong, or you're not going fast enough. I mean, that's the nature. You can't have a fear of failing. You have to have a fear of not failing fast. If you don't try, that's accepting the outcome. That's not what we're here to do. So, luckily I'm in a group that understands that with risk, calculated risk, and good investments and good strategies, you can create good outcomes. But at the same time, there's also hey, we'd rather you be progressive and trying new things that can help us. And that's the reason for a failure, as opposed to the failure becoming because of your lack of desire to change what we do. There's no tolerance for that. There's a lot of tolerance for failing fast, learning, iterating, evolving, moving forward.
You know, I'm pausing just a little bit because I want to phrase this properly, but what media has went through, and I'm talking about, you got the Yellow Page business, whether that was media or not, or listings, whatever, but in the media business, that was probably where Google impacted first. And I like to call it probably one of the best products that was ever invented, because it solved a problem and you had to pay for it, right? Because if you didn't pay for your Yellow Page ad, they shut your phone off because it was tied to the phone. So think about that. That one's the first one that gets punched when Google comes in. Then it really hit newspapers, and you and I lived that. Then it started to hit broadcast. And as you look at that industry and all of it's going through change, you're like, how did parts of this not see it coming, because it already happened over here? So now we have all these other industries that are about to be impacted by change. How can they learn from what's happened in the industry that you and I have been closest to? Because there is a shit ton of learnings in there, that it's like other industries, just look over here because it's about to come your way. And I'm not going to list them
Yeah.
because I think people would just draw their own conclusions from the news right now. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Be willing to talk with people who are willing to share where they failed. Find people that have that same type of mentality, because again, if I'm sharing what I've failed in, you've shared what you've failed in, that creates an opportunity for us to learn in things we neither one of us want to fail on in the future. So again, accept failure is part of what you're doing. Again, if you're not failing, you're not pushing hard enough or going fast enough.
But we have an entire, I don't disagree with you, by the way, but we have entire organizations that have been built around a hierarchy where you hide the failures because you don't want to look like you made a mistake. You report over here to your superior that everything's sunshine and rainbows. And then I think that there's a correlation there to culture and the way that people have been involved in organizations to the way that organizations need to evolve today. I don't know if you agree with that or not, though.
Uh, I would agree. I think it's the question is, to what degree do you pivot? I think there's a lot that can be, we live in a world where you don't have to ask or question many things. You just have to, tell an AI what you're thinking about, and it's going to help you. So things are moving and changing so fast. You have to be of the mindset and open to change. If as people we don't understand that we're changing, the amount of change we go through every day, just when changing an iPhone or changing this, or sign up for Netflix or dropping Netflix to go to Hulu because they've got, we're changing stuff all day long, which is part of the reason why at work we don't like change, because we have it so much in what we do in other places that we don't want to have it here, and without change, without evolution, there is somebody somewhere that is coming to dethrone you because they want the position that you have. If you're the yellow pages, there's somebody looking to say, gosh, there's got to be a different way, or gosh, there's got to be a better way. Without those types of questions, you don't have change or disruption, and without disruption, you don't have innovation. You're stalled. If you stop growth, you can't evolve. You can't live. You can't eat. You can't pay bills. It's all about change and how you go about that change. But I say the word change a lot. Change without measurement is a waste of time. You have to measure where you're going. If you didn't have a map telling you that you missed the turn, you're gonna keep going in the wrong direction. I rely on my maps in my car when I'm traveling to tell me where I'm going. We need to be trusting our systems, and we should be able to trust our systems and data the same way. When my map says turn right, I don't question why it's telling me to turn right. I turn right, because I trust the data and the science behind the recommendation. Somebody's coming to dethrone you. Know your stuff, know your numbers, know your strength, know your weakness, know your flaws. Make them your strength. That's evolution. It's every day. That's what, George. That's what if that's not what you're prepared for, media today is not the right environment. Many people can say, "Gosh, media isn't fun anymore." And to those people, it may not be, because it's not what they knew fun was. I know plenty of people that are having fun. It's a different type of fun. They're finding enjoyment in different ways. That's the opportunity we have in media, is to continue evolving, because that's what we can count on.
Well, and you bring up a really good point, and I'm thinking back to a veteran or long in the tooth or grizzled up old vet, what do you want to call it, saying to me one day, "Well, the industry is completely different," and I'm like, I don't really know if it's completely different. It just is being done in a different way, and if we were really honest with ourselves, it's been evolving the whole time. I am a radio guy by trade, and I spent some time in the publishing business, and then worked in a tech company with lots of different media companies. And I guarantee you that a studio at a TV station does not look the same today as it did back in the day. and it was constantly evolving. Same with the studio in a radio station. Same with the printing facility. So I think sometimes it's just easier to say, well, I'm not having fun, when if you think back, you really weren't having fun back then either. You were dealing with challenges, you were moving forward. Like let's just call a spade a spade. What I do think was that there was a lot of money flowing, and it was easier to not be as buttoned up in your process. And I think that that's where I'm getting to, is when it got hard and you had to measure everything. You had a bunch of people that had never had to measure anything before, so they didn't even know how to do it. Um, and
Yeah,
that might be the
yeah,
one thing that took it out in certain places, where you just had entire organizations that couldn't measure.
couldn't, and you also have some that don't want to.
Well, I was trying
So
not to say that, but you said it.
there's a difference. I mean, can't and won't are two different words for a specific reason. A person either can't and won't, or can and will. I think those are two different things. You have to understand where, when people are struggling to make decisions, or it's where can they make the decision or can't they, and then it's will they or won't they. I think that plays into what we're talking about here. If you know, we can do that today. It'd be like wanting to have a surgery done in a 30-year-old surgery center. That's not me. I want to go to the brightest doctor in the best facility with the newest resourcing to get done the most efficient way, so I can rehab my knee, shoulder as fast as I can to get back out to injure it again. You know, that's what we're expecting from medicine. We don't want to have a surgery and then be out for 6 months because of, it's, we love change when it benefits us. We've got to learn to get comfortable with it so it's not dragging us down, because it's a constant. It's not going to change. And if you have the option of controlling what you can control or can't control, you can't control whether change is going to happen. You can control how you roll with it. And the people that choose to roll with it are able to stay in that flow longer. And that's the journey. We're all on this continuous journey of transformation and change. It doesn't end. I don't know. I've not found the end of the ride or the end of the wave pool. It keeps going and going and going, and that's how 8 years can go by as fast as they can, and as fast as they have at Salem, and still feel like there's so much to do. I'm often reminded by people that if you also don't every once in a while stop and smell the roses, you can get very discouraged if you're a person who thrives in change. Guilty. I'm not hey, let's stop and smell the roses because I'm too worried about what's not getting done that could be, while I'm stopping to smell the roses. So again, I'm evolving. We're all evolving. And I mean that's the we're all. It's a journey that we're all on together, whether we like it or not. And I tend to think I thrive in these types of environments, and I'm continuing to do those things to the best of my abilities every single day.
Well, Jamie, I think that that's the mic drop moment that you just gave us there, because um, it hasn't changed. As you were saying those words, I was thinking back to my second boss, first general manager of a radio station, because that was my second job, was working at the radio station. And he told me something. He's like, the only constant is change, and I've never forgotten that, and it's true. So that's 40 years ago. That the only constant was change. The difference now, if there is any difference, is just the pace of change. And I'm pretty sure that you agree with me on that.
So yeah, I would tell you, you saying that made me think of what I said at our first managers meeting, and the irony of it still being true today. So what I close with is, you guys and gals are going to feel like the pace I'm asking you to go is faster than you've ever gone. And while true, I'm asking you to accept a reality that we're never going to go this slow again. And that's still the world that we're in 8 years later. So when you ask about, it's again, it's, I go back, I've looked back at that original presentation, and, there are still things on the list to get done, but that's part of evolution. It's never over.
Well, all the best as you continue to fight the good fight and help all those fine folks that you help on a day-to-day basis. I appreciate all the times that you've jumped on a quick call and answered a question that I've had. Is we've been working together over the years, and thanks for joining me once again and on the new show, the Evolved Pros podcast.
George, your partnership has meant a ton, but your friendship has meant more. So thank you very much.
I'm George Leith, and I'll see you when I see you.
That's the conversation for this week. If it moves something, share it with someone who needs it. I'm George Leith. I'll see you when I see you.